Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of our Elden Ring play, sort of. And today's encounter is the most difficult encounter after the greatest enemy we know in Soulsborne games, gravity. The second hardest, math. What I have here today is a display version of the sheets that Sybithos uses for tracking our level advancement in Elden Ring. Although this was made for Elden Ring, these stats are just labels, so it could essentially be refed to any kind of game as long as it has level advancement that you could customize. So these cells are where the character's stats are put in. Pretty straightforward there. Uh, you have the various classes. I think the Blind Ink was just a testing. And the over here is the Fedibo species. That's something for us. Our system has consists of altars that have so far gravitated towards one of six species, and Acetos, Zacchaeus, and so on are the representations of our species identity and mental space. And the Aceto basically won the contest of whose level tracking was going to be used. So that's what we have here. Astrologer determines your starting level and stats. So that is put down here according to the to this. These tiers are advancement patterns that are determined by the species. And the priority here is pretty straightforward. There's a hidden column. You notice how it starts at Bn12. There's a hidden column that sort of gives a priority count, and it basically fills stars in based on if the priority is at or greater a certain amount. So it just uses the conca conca con concatenate concept. It uses this function to combine. Okay, well, it's a high enough priority that it has this many stars. It's high enough priority that has this many stars. It's a high enough priority to have this star. High enough priority to this star. Not a high enough priority for this star. Still not high enough. Da 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 da. All the way to the end. Pretty straightforward. I won't go over that in detail. And you probably, uh, if you need help with that, I could leave a pinned comment, I guess. But it seems like it would be good to figure out on your own. The levels are determined along progressions. Uh, these are the levels by the start of a tier. And these are the stats by the start of a tier. Sorry if there was a little bit of a jitter. I kind of screwed up and I had to cut the segment end of the last segment, and so now we're starting here. So what we have is that we're going to start with the progress to the next level. And what we're going to do is we're going to start off with a couple of checks. Uh, you, uh, you're going to get the current level that we're working with, this 158, and we're going to check if it's over the current tier we're wanting to look at. The tier starts from here at level 111, and it ends here at level 276. So we're checking if we got that much. And we also want to check another thing. You see how the stats here and the levels are 99, 99, 99, 713, 713, 713. Yeah, we don't want to count tiers that are like that because there's no changes and we don't want to screw anything up. So if we don't have any advancement into the tier and we don't have any uh, changes through the tier, then we don't want to do the segment that is going from this tier to the next. And because of that, we do these two checks, and if either of them fail, or if both of them fail, then we return a 0. Because these tiers segments are added together, 0 will prevent us from seeing any change. And now that we have that check started, let's first look at how much the tier changes our stat. We'll look at the 40 over here, because we're looking at vigor right now. This formula is for the cell for vigor. We got 40 vigor, and we'll subtract by the 20 that we start with. So it's a span of 20 vigor that we're changing across these levels. And then we're going to figure out the current level up to the cap. And we're going to do this with the tier ceiling bonk check. The tier ceiling bonk check checks if our current level is over the end of a tier. Because remember, the formula checked if we made progress. The checks for this at the beginning only checked if we started on it. It doesn't tell us if we got past the end of it. And so we check if our level is higher than the end of a tier. If this 158 ends up being greater than, well, what we have here is 276, then we'll go, uh-oh, we'll work with a 276. So basically, imagine if it was 358 instead of 158. If we had 358, we would go, nope, you only have 276. And if we don't have that limit, since it's 158, then we can go ahead and use that 158 after all. And what we'll do is we'll subtract the 158 from the start of tier. And what that does is that makes sure that we're only working with the current levels along the tier that we've advanced. Now, this gets divided by this range. And that's the end of the level, the tier at the end of the level, from the tier at the start of the level. So we have the range of how much into this range we're at by doing the 158 minus 111. And that gets divided by the total span, the 276 minus 111. And so we divided that and we get the percent. And we were looking at that 20 vigor. So for the 47 levels we're into it, we find the percent there and multiply the 20 that we got from here into the 47 levels. And that will return to us what our how much vigor we get from our current progress along level. And we get that formula. And then we do this whole process again, going from the base to the 0. And we do it again, going from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5. It'll essentially end going 2 to 3 because these last segments are redundant. But it's basically, they're there so that if we want to have more tiers we can. And that's why I just explained is this part. So we get the advancement, get the next one, and we check for every stat. Uh, as for the level itself, it's just what was determined to be this level and adding one. So next we'll look at the minimum level. And I'll go ahead and cut to another segment since that'll be a pretty smart way to do this. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and do the minimum level, and this one, well, I actually edited the variables so that it would be working with the tier 0 to tier 1. The in the actual cells, we always have just started from tier 4 to 5, and I figured that this time it wasn't important to modify it because it's very similar to what we were working at before. I'll do a quick walkthrough to make sure that everything is so that you know how it works out. So first of all, we want to get the lowest level that you will have achieved this stat, and then we start doing so we have this whole thing rounded up. And so we go ahead and start with our checks. We check to make sure that the stat is higher than the stat is on the actual tier progression. So check if it's over the 99 for tier 4. And we also want to check to make sure that the tier progresses by some amount from tier 4 into tier 5. In this case, both of these checks failed. So what we would get is 0 so that we could just not touch anything, not break anything. But let's actually go through with this. Let's just say, you know what, it's all fine. What we want to first check is the change of the span of the levels. So we want to deduct the tier 5's level from the tier 4 so that we could get our range of 0 levels in advancement. And then we do the tier ceiling bonk check. And it's going to bonk check for the stats so that we can get the progression of our stat here going from here to here. Well, I already explained how the ceiling bonk check works. So we get our current stat up to the cap, and we subtract it from the tier 4 figure, and then we divide the stat as it where it ends on the tier, but by the stat that where it starts at the tier. And by doing that, we get the advancement along that our vigor is along the stat track. And by doing that, we could apply the percent of progression we got along the tier to find our percent of progression along our levels. And I didn't explain it in the first section, but I'll explain it here because it both has the same principle. What we want to make sure doesn't happen is that we want to make sure that the value actually changed going from the start of a tier to the end. Because if you don't have a change, you get a return of 0. If you get a return of 0, the spreadsheet freaks out and says, you tried to divide by 0. Are you trying to get a cataclysm for the universe? I do not want a cataclysm. I will not do this math. So that's how the minimum level factors. And we find the minimum level for every stat. And just to be fancy, We check the range from the lowest minimum level to the highest minimum level. After that, we get the target stats. The target stats are simple. They check what's the highest level, and we check what the stats will be for that level instead of checking it by the next. And we cut off the decimals for this. I believe it was rounded up here as well. No, it's rounded down. It's rounded down for here. And then this checks what level you would actually end up being. Because remember, we had the rounded up level. And this just kind of edges out the wonkiness in our experience. So you have the next level, what the next level advances. You get the minimum level to get these stats, and you get the target that is derived from your stats. If we didn't have a stat exceeding, like our vigor did, then the target should be very close with the next level. But because our vigor was 27, it shot the target level way up. And this happened because we changed how we scaled our faith and vigor. We cut the vigor scaling a little bit and increased the faith scaling. The reasoning that happened there was, we're basically getting 1 to 2 shot anyways. We have better investments to do. I'll end for the squishy mage. The last part of this block here is going to be the planner. The planner, you just enter a level and it calculates essentially the way the next level is calculated, except it calculates for what level's here instead of what level's here. The colors are achieved by conditional formatting, and it's basically checking, okay, is this higher or equal to this? Okay, make it blue. Actually, it should be if it's higher here than here, make it blue. So this is probably like 45.02 or something like that. Because the actual formulas will look at what's actually calculated and not what's displayed. So this is rounded in the formula, so it would actually use this, but this is not cut off with rounding. So if it's 25.7217779, it'll do that and not the 25.7. And this is sorted by the way that the game sorted. For here, we have the sorting calculated according to the priority system. So it sorts out here, but then it just kind of uses the notes from how this worked. I think we just copied the block and pasted it and made sure it referenced the stats right. I think it uses an XLOOK. Yeah, it uses XLOOKUP. Okay, it sees that that this stat is a mind, so it goes here, and it pulls from here, and that's how that works. There's not really anything to really do to say for it. What's useful is that, for example, we see that dexterity and faith are both yellow. They could use some advancement. So I would know from looking at this priority sorting to go with my dexterity before I go with my faith. The endurance is red though, so it would be recommended to go with the endurance next. So the altar will just pull up the sheet and go around and go, okay, I think I need endurance now. Okay, putting endurance. And that is the minimum level, the target, the planner, and the additional sheet. Alright, so we're going to look at the library and class index now. And the levels here are calculated based off of a stat stuff, but it's actually also redundantly counted in the library here. The class indexes level is actually used though. I had to pause so that I can update these to be black background white text. So these tiers and these priorities are determined by pulling from here. And from here we get the different species identities. Tip beer is another testing set. And what we have here is the column of the vigor advancement for the Tercelo, their stated priority. Uh, then we have for the Zacchaeus, the Resulta, Girgum, so on. Um, we do have little formulas we do to determine how we find these exact numbers, but it's not really part of how it works. But hey, you can see what all the hypothetical stat builds would be. Like how the Resulta actually decide to level up their vigor. We could have had something like 40 vigor in our run, but no, we went with the Seto who don't care about HP. They play black mana and Magic the Gathering apparently, because only the last HP counts. Alright, before I move on, level from which this is just getting the levels. There's not really anything to mention. Now, the last thing I will be going over today will be the actual classes. We do note the source for the classes, but it doesn't really factor into anything. It's just a note for our indexing here. Uh, the the stats are put through here, and they'll determine the base tier. We get the level based on what the stated level value is, and then we get the level, the vanilla level balance. This is where we get subtract the 10 from every stat, add initial level 1 for straight 10 stats, and then we get the levels from changing the changes in the class. So this basically makes sure that there's no funny business from here and here. Uh, Not that would actually change anything. So it's another trivia from another trivia cell, and that is it. We This is pretty much everything in our Elden Ring stat sheet. And I hope that this has helped you if you want to organize your level advancements and just not manually figure out, okay, I want this, that, and this, that. It's not perfect. You can't exactly get a level into 38.5 dexterity, but uh, unfortunately, that's going to be a limitation realistically with the stats, because we could do like a remainder kind of a thing, but like, okay, we got this 8 stats, but remainder 1 we put intelligence, remainder 2 and mind, remainder 3 dexterity, remainder 4 intelligence, so that you could get whole number by whole number by whole number, and then you just round down to cut off the next level. Oh, without that. But the problem with that is that when you have a tier set up like this, and when they can level up unequally, you have really wild, awkward changes, and it doesn't play nice with trying to do it this way. It, like, in theory, you could have something that automatically sorted out a sort of turn order for stat advancement, but we just have not figured that. We feel like we got decently close, but it kind of fell apart, and that happened multiple times. So I hope that you all enjoyed, and I hope you have a great day.